There is a version of love that you were never warned about, not the love that ends in a dramatic breakup, not the love that explodes into a fight you can finally point to. A quieter love. A slower one. A love where nothing visibly breaks, but something inside you begins, very gradually, to disappear. You have been loving someone whose entire nervous system was designed to pull away from the very thing you kept offering them. And what no one prepared you for is how the dark side of loving that person is not their behavior. It is what their behavior quietly did to yours. Here is the brutal part. You spent years rehearsing for a kind of love that was never available to you. You learned their moods. You mapped their silences. You became an expert in the difference between their "I'm fine" and their real "I'm fine." You learned to read the three-dot indicator like a seismograph. You learned how to shrink a cry into a calm voice. You learned how to want less so they wouldn't leave, and you called that adaptation. You called that maturity. It wasn't maturity. It was surrender. Loving an avoidant in the deepest sense is loving a person who is, in real time, disappearing from you. Not because they are cruel. Because their nervous system cannot tolerate the exact frequency of closeness you keep handing them. And your brain, in response, doesn't get to rest. Cortisol becomes chronic. You begin living in a low-grade state of alert, scanning for tone, scanning for distance, scanning for the micro-moment when their voice flattens and you already know before they speak that they are about to go somewhere you cannot follow. This is not love. This is hypervigilance dressed up as devotion. Let me take you inside their physiology, gently, because I want you to stop blaming yourself for what their biology is doing to your nervous system. When emotional intimacy rises too quickly inside a person with avoidant attachment wiring, the amygdala misfires. There is no enemy in the room. There is no threat at the door. But their brain codes closeness as danger because in their earliest emotional architecture, closeness once cost them something. Perhaps it cost them autonomy. Perhaps it cost them safety. Perhaps it cost them a parent's tenderness that arrived only in conditions they could not predict. Whatever the original wiring was, the system still runs it. Cortisol floods, the breath shortens. The heart rate climbs. The body prepares to leave a room where nothing is wrong except that someone is finally seeing them. And dopamine, the cruelest molecule in this whole story, does not reward love in this pattern. It rewards uncertainty. So when you were steady, when you were warm, when you kept showing up without demanding they show up back, your consistency was, paradoxically, less stimulating to their reward system than the moments you pulled away. You were the sunlight. Their nervous system preferred the candle, not because the candle was better. Because the candle was unpredictable, and unpredictability in avoidant biochemistry is the only form of connection that does not feel like debt. This is the part that wounded you most, even though you couldn't have named it. You were there fully, and their body registered your presence as a kind of pressure they could not metabolize. You were not loved less. Their biochemistry simply could not hold you at the volume you were offering. But let me reframe this, because the reframe is where the script finally begins to breathe. They didn't stop loving you. They felt engulfed by you. Your warmth, your questions, your wanting, your remembered details about them. All of it landed like heat in a room that had been cold for years. And someone who has been cold for years does not know how to stand in heat without interpreting it as a threat. Their withdrawal was not a verdict on your worth. It was their body's attempt to survive a kind of intimacy they had not been trained to receive. Reframing this does not erase what it cost you. But it removes the false belief that the cost was about you being insufficient. It was not. The cost was about their wiring having a ceiling yours kept exceeding. Now I want to introduce the one core concept I want you to carry through the rest of this script. Non-reactivity, not as a strategy, as a nervous system state. The single most destabilizing thing a deeply avoidant person can encounter is not your absence. It is your steadiness in the face of their absence. When you stop reacting to their silence, when you stop flaring at their distance, when you stop treating their withdrawal as a message you must urgently decode, something inside their architecture begins to glitch. Not because you broke them, because you removed the mirror they had been using to feel in control. And a person who has spent years feeling in control through distance does not know who they are without that mirror. Your steadiness does not punish them. It simply refuses to feed an old system that has been quietly running your life. Picture this with me. It's a Tuesday evening. They are at dinner with their friends. The conversation is light. Someone mentions a movie. Someone asks about weekend plans. And without warning, your name floats through their mind like a piece of furniture they forgot they sold. They think about the way you laughed at something ordinary, the way you used to ask them real questions in a world that mostly asks surface ones. They feel briefly a sudden, almost violent nostalgia. They check their phone under the table. Nothing. They check again a few minutes later, still nothing. And instead of the relief they had been rehearsing, they feel a strange internal tightening, as if a wire they've been ignoring has finally been plucked. They tell themselves this is what they wanted. They wanted you to stop. They wanted quiet. And on the surface, the lie is so convincing they almost believe it. But by the time they pull into their driveway, the relief is gone. By the time they unlock their door, they have scrolled to your profile twice. By the time they're sitting on the edge of their bed, they've typed 3 different beginnings of a message, none of which they send. This is the moment the power dynamic begins to invert, and I want you to feel the weight of this without romanticizing it, because what follows is the most dangerous territory in the whole pattern. For years, they were the one who controlled the rhythm. They dictated when the closeness arrived and when the closeness ended. You adapted, you shrank. You performed unbothered while internally trying to decode every syllable of their absence. Now, suddenly, they are the ones reaching for a phone that does not bring them your warmth. They are the ones refreshing a conversation that no longer updates. They are the ones feeling the specific, almost hallucinatory loneliness of someone whose nervous system relied on your pursuit without ever admitting it. And the cruelest part, the part you don't want to acknowledge, is that this version of them, the reaching back version, is the version you have been waiting for. It is also, neurologically, the least trustworthy. This is the warning, and I need you to hear it without rushing past it. The moment they come back is not the moment you have won. It is the moment you are most at risk of losing yourself for a second time. Their return will feel like a revelation. The long overdue apology will sound almost holy. The new softness in their voice will feel like proof that the waiting worked, that the strategy paid off, that the pattern has finally reversed. And the intoxicating thing, the chemical thing, the thing that will spike your own dopamine to dangerous levels, is the feeling of being chosen by someone who once refused you. Do not collapse into it. Do not pour your whole self back into the container you spent months quietly rebuilding without them, because their returning softness is not a transformation. It is a withdrawal symptom. The same nervous system that pushed you away is now pulling you back because it is hungry for the regulation you provide. And if you let this cycle repeat, you teach their system one more time that you will always come back when the hunger gets loud enough. You confirm, in your own body, that love is a ration. That closeness is a scarcity. That waiting is the price of being with someone who could never, in real time, meet you where you were. So what breaks it? Not revenge. Not silence performed for an audience. Not the cold, rehearsed indifference you have been practicing in the bathroom mirror before bed. What breaks it is the slow, unsexy, almost boring work of becoming a person whose nervous system no longer requires their return to feel stable. You do this in private. You do this in therapy that is not performative. You do this in the unglamorous hours where no one applauds. You learn to tolerate your own feelings without outsourcing the regulation to a partner who used your tenderness as a container for their chaos. You reestablish a baseline of self-cohesion that does not depend on a single human being showing up in a particular way on a particular day. You remember who you were before you learned to make yourself smaller. You remember the version of you that wanted things loudly, that asked for what they needed without apologizing for the asking. That did not soften a need into a joke, so the other person could laugh instead of leave. You bring that person back, not for them, for the life you are quietly, patiently in your own time building without them in it. And if they are doing real work, real, technically difficult, psychologically uncomfortable work on themselves, if they have stopped using your warmth as a clinical trial for whether they can survive closeness today, if they can sit across from you at a table and hear you say, "I need you to show up more reliably," without retreating into the fog of unavailability, then something has genuinely changed. And you can meet that version of them slowly, with the new shape of yourself intact, without collapsing into the reunion your body has been begging for. But if they come back the same shape they left in, if the apology is a craving rather than a transformation, if their tenderness arrives at the exact intervals, their hunger spikes and disappears again when the hunger is satisfied, then the kindest, most dignified thing you can do is remain honestly elsewhere. Not as punishment, as protection, as the final, quiet demonstration that your love was never the problem. Their nervous system was, and you are no longer willing to be its medicine. You were not too much. You were not too needy. You were not too emotional. You were loving in a frequency that their architecture could not hold. That is their limitation, not your flaw. And the life waiting for you on the other side of this is not a life shaped by their absence. It is a life shaped by your presence. You're real, unedited, no longer shrinking, no longer apologizing, no longer performing, bounded by their capacity to receive you presence. Let that be the version of you that walks forward tonight. The version that checks their phone, finds nothing, and feels, for the first time in years, not numbness but peace. The kind of peace that arrives only after the storm you have been calling love finally clears.